I have poured myself a glass of wine for this one because I feel like this is just such a dark topic. I'm
For
like, oh
sure.
boy.
What's up, everybody? I'm Katie.
And I'm Morgan.
And this is For Your Misinformation, a podcast dedicated to empowering women to be more politically engaged so we can act in our own best interests.
Let us break down the problem and tell you what we're doing and what you can do to help solve it.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Morgan.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm having a lot of good luck with my cats lately. And it is my niece's birthday. So I want to wish her a happy birthday today. She does not listen to the podcast because she's one. But someday she might listen.
She doesn't listen yet.
To all of our back episodes. You never know. So I got to make sure I'm doing due diligence.
Right.
What's new in your life?
One of my best friends had a baby yesterday. She had a baby girl, which I'm very excited about. But I couldn't stop thinking. So I've been doing research for this episode for a couple of weeks. Today we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Mafia states. So it's like a heavy topic, but like obviously the Epstein Maxwell stuff is heavy, and it's like, ooh, I hope that the world this little baby girl just got born into gets a whole lot more fair and just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that every time I look at my nieces, I'm like, we're going to make sure that the world that you're growing up in is better.
I sure hope so.
We're trying.
Before we start, make sure that you're requesting mail-in ballots now. So just like always, you can get links to everything that we talk about in our link tree, which is in our show notes. It's also in our Instagram and our Twitter bios. So everything we talk about is linked in those places. So you can request a mail-in ballot from there. Remember that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle the post office from the inside, setting up thousands of voters to be disenfranchised when their mail-in ballots don't arrive in time. So that's why you have to make sure to request now. And then also, like, it feels weird not to mention what's going on in, like, Portland and now even, like, New York. Like, that stuff is very scary to have unmarked law enforcement picking up people, but we can only talk about one terrible thing at a time. So I don't know. Do you have anything else you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say too. Like right now, I'm just like feeling like so scared. I watched a video today and I think it was in New York and it just like made my stomach churn and my blood boil. And it's like, we're definitely going to have to talk about the American Gestapo, but
right.
Yeah, we have a whole different super dark, super sad, upsetting thing to talk about today.
Right.
So, we won't overwhelm you guys with happy things.
I do.
Pedophilia and Gestapo and sorry, continue.
Yes, but I did. There are definitely people in this story who tried to do the right thing, and I like really do highlight them. So hopefully it's not like super, super depressing, but we are recording this on July 29th. As of today, there have been 153,000 COVID deaths in the United States. But that, and I don't think we've done an update since this started happening, the COVID data is now being collected by the Trump administration and the White House instead of the CDC. So we like straight up don't know how accurate that is anymore. Yeah. So that is like what it says. Like that makes sense to me that there's still like about 1,000 deaths a day in the United States. But I just want to say that is what happens in governments that aren't transparent and don't tell their citizens everything that's going on.
Yeah. Yep. Also, with that video that came out that Don Jr. retweeted with that the new quote unquote COVID expert talking about hydroxychloroquine and demon sex and all that.
Scary.
I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast is going to have a hard time refuting that entire mess of a video. if there's people in your life who are sharing it that you think might be open to actually having a conversation about why it's insane, have that conversation. Don't, shy away from it, because misinformation is harmful.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also some people that I have given up hope on ever learning. And so the best we can do is just arm ourselves and the people with a little shred of rationality left, to not fall for things like that monstrosity.
Yeah. Plus, there's like almost just as many people who didn't vote as people who did vote for Trump. So if you don't want to waste your time on people who can't be converted, like there are probably people out there who can.
Yeah, exactly. Like, make sure nobody in your life is one of the 106 million people who didn't vote in 2016, because we cannot afford another 2020.
Right.
Like, we can't have this year just go on for another 4 more after this.
Right.
Because that's what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So the election is, if you're listening to this the day it comes out, the election is 13 weeks away, or 92 days, however you prefer to think about it. So request your ballot now. Lately, I've just been thinking about how like diverse Joe Biden's coalition is compared to Trump, and it's just crazy. And I don't know, like the closer it gets, the like we said, we're not like huge fans of him, but I do see like just things calming down, like he would just chill. He would just like make the country chill,
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna start talking about Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, let's do it. Trigger warning, blanket trigger warning.
Yeah. This episode is rough. It has sexual abuse of minors, mentions of suicide, transnational crime syndicate masquerading as a government, but that's in every episode, and like everything in between. It's also still unfolding. It's like a mostly untold story. I tried to weave in some stuff. So I got most of this information from the Hiding in Plain Sight. No, sorry. God, sorry. I keep getting distracted. All right.
Is it the kittens?
Oh no, I left them downstairs. I was kind of hoping Hazel.
That was probably a good idea.
Come hang out with us. Yeah, I was like, there's enough new like variables that you should see this setup. Actually, I will send you a picture so that you can.
I am jealous of your
try and
podcast
recreate it because there's like books. It's complicated. Okay. Okay, so I got most of this information from the Netflix series called Filthy Rich, but I also tried really hard to include the sketchy stuff from Sarah Kenzier's book, Hiding in Plain Sight, and weave that into the timeline from Filthy Rich. And then the same with the federal judge whose family was just targeted. That's part of the reason that we want to talk about this right now too. Although it was just a coincidence, we were already working on this episode, so that was kind of crazy. But yeah, so I also weaved in some stuff that was going on with Trump and Putin and the Russian mafia during these years too, because they are related, unfortunately. So, like I said, we're talking about it now because Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm sorry, everybody, it's not Ghislaine. I know you really want it to be Ghislaine. It's not. It's either Ghislaine or Ghislaine. It kind of, but that's what like the survivors or her victims call her, so that's what like I'm going to call her. So, but I do like I don't know. Sometimes I switch between Ghislaine and Ghislaine, but you understand who I'm talking about. So anyway, she was arrested in early July, which was just about a month ago. And then the husband of the judge in the Deutsche Bank Epstein case was shot and her son was killed, which I want to be sure, like, we call that what it is. It's like white supremacist terrorism, which is a very real threat in America. And it's why our very, very first episode was about white supremacy, because, like, everything always comes back to white supremacy. Everything wrong here does. So, yeah. So watch Filthy Rich. It's only 4 episodes. and read Hiding in Plain Sight, or just listen to this. But yeah, so it's been almost exactly a year since Epstein was killed. For the sake of simplicity, I'm mostly going to talk about just these three survivors. Two sisters who are named Maria and Annie Farmer, who were abused by Epstein in the 90s and reported it to the FBI. And then Virginia Roberts, who was trafficked by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell from Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. And she was trafficked to Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz, among others. So cool.
Awesome.
Right. So he referred to his primary home as the one that he had in the Virgin Islands. He owned an island there called Little St. James. But he had vacation homes. He had a ranch in New Mexico. He had a mansion in Palm Beach and an apartment in New York and Paris. He also had multiple jets, a 747. He was only... Well, okay, never mind. Sorry. So I do think he's dead. Some people don't think he's dead. I do think he's dead. I just don't think he died by suicide. I am pretty confident that he was murdered. We'll get into like the very, very suspicious circumstances of his death later. But I am pretty concerned about Ghislaine Maxwell because she's currently housed in the same prison that Epstein died in. So...
And that seems suspicious.
I know, I just don't know why you do that. But also, that prison is functioning with fewer than 70% of the needed correctional officers, forcing many to work overtime, mandatory overtime, and like 60 to 70 hour work weeks, according to like whoever oversees the prison that she's currently in. So I don't know, that just seems bad. Seems like a bad combination of variables. So we'll see.
Like
that. But honestly, this is really a story about how society like consistently lets women and girls down and enables abusers. And there's this just like horrible wealth inequality between Palm Beach Island and West Palm Beach that makes it like exponentially easier for Maxwell and Epstein to run a molestation pyramid scheme out of his Palm Beach mansion. Okay, so yes, so the wealth inequality made it like really, really easy for them to run like this molestation pyramid scheme out of his Palm Beach mansion, which I guess I never really thought about it before, but like it first occurred to me when I was watching the Netflix documentary about R. Kelly, but like a lot of these trafficking victims aren't missing at all. They're just being trafficked. Like, it's extra sad. I mean, I don't know if it's extra sad, but it's just not how I pictured it. So they like don't even have to be kidnapped. Like most of them aren't missing. Like they are home Sunday night for dinner, or like they're going to school. It's just so weird.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like I don't know. I think that often like people think human trafficking is all like the movie Taken, and it's not.
Because people would get caught if it was like that, probably.
Yeah, exactly. That's not how it is. Like, I mean, people also like to think their dad is just like Liam Neeson, and he's not.
He doesn't have any skills.
Yeah, exactly. Like he does not have a special set of skills.
Or at least not one that would like rescue you from that kind of danger.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's just not how it is. And I feel like
he can help you with your taxes.
They need to do a better job of teaching people about that, like in school.
Yeah.
I think I was in high school, maybe still, when the movie Taken came out. And I remember my high school English teacher being like, hey, so today we're going to talk about human trafficking. And we were all like, what? This is English class. And I think it was inspired by Taken. And she talked about like what human trafficking actually looks like.
That's crazy.
And it was like, yeah, 27 million people are still in some type of like slavery every year. And I was just like, what? And my mind was so blown. And I feel like the fact that I had that conversation in high school is very rare. Like, I don't think most people are taught that. And it's like, maybe if they were, girls would, I mean, and boys, but especially like these girls, these victims would maybe have seen it a little bit more for what it was. We actually talked about the way people are exploited.
Yeah, you can identify predatory behavior. I mean, now we know what to look for.
Yeah,
but
like we don't teach people that. Same
right,
with like
we
stranger danger,
had to
right?
learn by being preyed upon.
Yeah, right,
So,
exactly. It's same with like when we teach little kids even about like we teach them about stranger danger and like nobody should touch your privates, blah blah blah. But like trust people you know, and like we already know like most kids, if they're abused, it's by somebody that they are close to, and it's like we have to have those hard conversations with
if
everyone,
kids
whether
don't,
they're 2 years old or 12 or 17. And
if they don't want to hug you, don't make them hug you. And if your kid doesn't want to hug somebody, maybe it's for a reason. But also don't make them, because they don't want to, and they should learn really, really early that they don't have to do anything they don't want to do.
Yeah, like you want to protect your kid
With
from
their
potentially
body.
being a victim of somebody like Jeffrey Epstein someday. Teach them about consent.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that would have probably gone a long way. So you will notice a couple different patterns with the victims. If they're poor, he would offer $200 for a massage or for providing another girl for a massage. So like they didn't even have to give him a massage. If they brought a girl that would give him a massage, the girl would get $200, and the girl who brought them would get $200. And because of this like horrible wealth inequality between Palm Beach, which is a mansion, and West Palm Beach, which was a really low income area, had a lot of trailer parks and stuff. $200 was a lot, and especially like in the 90s, I think it was more like $290.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a lot of money. And it was really sad because a lot of them like talked about needing the money to buy Christmas presents and stuff, and it was just like heartbreaking. So if they have like a stable home life and don't need the money in that way, he promises to provide whatever dream they want, like send them to a school or on a trip abroad or whatever, to manipulate them into putting up with the abuse. He also exploits past trauma, which is what R. Kelly did too. So if you've been a victim of abuse one time, you're more likely to be a victim of abuse again, which is extra sad, but that happened with a lot of his victims too. But the difference between him and R. Kelly is, well, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but Jeffrey Epstein had a lot more political influence and international reach, so he was even more dangerous. You'll also notice a pattern to avoid accountability, that when he gets caught doing anything wrong, he uses 3 tactics like really, really successfully. So he either bribes people, or he threatens them, or if he has it, he blackmails them. So the blackmail is mostly like an insurance policy against people who participated in his horrible shit. Like there were cameras in pretty much like hidden cameras, pinhole cameras in pretty much like every room of most of his residences. So if anybody was doing that stuff with him, it's on video. So he has blackmail on them.
I just like, I never am surprised, and yet sometimes I'm still surprised what just like incredible wealth can do in terms of like influence and power. Just
it is like the missing ingredient in just like, if you add wealth into like evil genius, like they're able to do so much damage, and they do. And like R. Kelly is the same way. Like neither of them would have been able to do nearly as much damage as they would have if they didn't have so much money. Because
and that's, I feel like if you have somebody who is smart and evil, that's dangerous. But as soon as they have money, they are like
whatever they want.
Unstoppably dangerous.
Yes. Also, I want to point out what authoritarian regimes are interested in doing is spreading propaganda, and one of the ways that they do that is with narrative inversion. And this is one of those things. So Pizzagate was a narrative inversion because like that was a conspiracy theory. Like there weren't children being trafficked out of the basement of a pizza parlor. This Jeffrey Epstein shit is very real, and a lot of really important people, Democrats and Republicans, participated in it, and we want all of them to get thrown in the garbage. But yeah, so just I just want to point that out because like they do that on purpose to try and discredit the real stuff. So again, I can't even tell you how many hours I worked on this. I mean, I worked on it for probably like 3 weeks, and there is just, I want everybody to come away from this episode being like, oh shit, okay, so all that shit that Jeffrey Epstein did was awful. Donald Trump absolutely participated in it, and they have the exact same tactics to avoid accountability. So I don't, like, if you listen all the way through to all the episodes about this, there's no, like, what I hope is that there's just like no gray area that you're just like, wow, that's crazy. So anyway, I just want to point out that the Pizzagate thing is like, they picked that on purpose to try and discredit this stuff, even though this stuff is real. So anyway, Jeffrey Epstein had a reputation for being good with money and getting very rich people to trust him with handling their money. But probably what's really going on is that a lot of really rich people like Prince Andrew are paying him a lot of money to provide them access to young girls and to be discreet about it. So think about this episode when you hear people call him and Ghislaine socialites or philanthropists. Like, that's not who they are. Like, this is who they are.
Yeah. I hate that when they're called socialites and philanthropists. Like, it makes them sound like good people who just did bad things, but they are bad people. Like, they are not socialites and philanthropists. They are snakes and they are pedophiles.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. And so he's smart, manipulative, narcissist, all of these traits that we know are bad, especially if you get into power. So he was smart enough to purposely associate himself with like upstanding people, and he acted upstanding around them so that they would lend credibility to him. And R. Kelly did that too. Like, they know how to act around particular people. Epstein did it with scientists in particular. Like I said, he was really smart. He did fund a lot of research and philanthropy, and you could totally tell that he thought that like made all the abuse okay. Like, he would talk about all the research that he would funded that was really hard to get funded, like quantum computing or something like that. Or I was just like, dude, what? Like, it doesn't make any of this okay. Also, like, this goes exactly into what we talked about the other week about philanthropy. Like, is this the guy that you want deciding what research gets funded? Like, why are we relying on this for that? Like, multiple sources said that he had an egg-shaped dick. Like, is this
what?
the
What?
dude?
No.
Sorry, wait. Hold on.
I'm sorry.
I have a funnier joke. Ben, take that part out. Hold on. Like, okay, so Jeffrey Epstein also had an interest in eugenics, which I think is hilarious. I mean, it's not hilarious. I guess it's kind of hilarious because he never got around to doing it, but he had this, like, vision of impregnating 20 women on his compound in New Mexico. And it's just like, why is it always, like, multiple sources said that Jeffrey Epstein had an egg-shaped dick. Like, why would we want more egg-shaped dicks around? Like, why would we want your genes to be
also
passed
like
on? Come on.
Eugenics? No. Also, like, this whole, like, have a compound in New Mexico where you impregnate 20 women. Like, what? That's a cult. That is some kind of weird cult. Call your dads, get a job, buy your own shit. Holy crap. Ew.
Yeah, it was.
Ew, that just gives me the chills, especially picturing an egg-shaped dick.
Yep. Also, if your dick is shaped weird, I'm sure it's fine. We
Yeah,
only
like
talk
not to
shit.
body shame, just
Right.
saying
We
like,
only
why
talk
did this guy
shit.
think he was so perfect?
Yeah. If you abuse women, we get to talk shit about your weird dick. That's the rule.
Yeah. Yep, it's true. Like, we don't make the rules.
Yeah.
It's just how it goes.
We also don't victim blame. So we don't say stuff like, well, if I were them, I would have. You have no idea how you would have reacted in that particular traumatic experience. They did what they had to do. And like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and all the other enablers, like they're the people to blame, not the victims.
Yeah, like 100%. Like, if you are a victim blamer, go swallow a hornet's nest and fuck all the way off. Like, they have done actual research even to see if people actually respond to things in the way that they say they would. So if they're in an interview, like, how would you respond if you saw an old lady that was about to get hit by a car or whatever? And like, these research scenarios aren't even real, and people still don't actually respond the way they say they will. They always say that they're going to respond in some really tough, assertive way, and they don't, because we do what we need to do to survive. And also, none of us are really as savvy as we think we are. It's in situations like that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, don't, yeah. Victim blamers can stop listening now.
No, it's a prerequisite. Like, away. Compassion is a prerequisite for listening to the show.
Yeah. Also, all like, right. we were both very smart high school students, and I can't speak for you, but like, I know I still probably would have fallen for some shit if somebody had been like, hey, I'll give you $200 for this. I'd be like, I can do a lot with $200. I'm 15. Cool. And then I would have gotten in this situation to realize, like, oh, this is not cool. I'm scared, but I don't know how to leave. So I guess I'll just go along with it. Better still get my $200.
Which is pretty much exactly what happened to every single person, because Ghislaine Maxwell or one of their classmates who was already being abused would normalize it. They would make it sound like, I'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, that's what everybody did. That's what happened. And they got really good at it because they did it to hundreds of girls. So they practiced. They knew what worked and what. All right. So 1953, Jeffrey Epstein is born. He was raised middle class. He was super smart. He skipped 2 grades, studied physics for 2 years in college, but he didn't graduate. In 1974, he was hired to teach math at the Dalton School, which is a very upscale all-girls high school in New York. He was hired by Attorney General Bill Barr's dad. So that's one of the parts that, like, immediately off the bat, that is left out of the Filthy Rich documentary, and I'm not really sure why. I mean, maybe they just didn't know, but that's never been explained. He was hired to teach math at the Dalton School. He didn't have a college degree. He went to college for 2 years to study physics, and Bill Barr's dad, Donald Barr, just gave him a job at one of the most prestigious all-girls high schools in New York.
Like, there's no way that this isn't where, like, it all got started. Like, it's just way too fucking fishy for it not to be relevant to the way in which this entire thing goes all the way to the top.
Yeah.
And just all of it.
Other weird fishy thing, Donald Barr wrote science fiction books about intergalactic sex slaves living under a dictatorship. True. Also not in the Filthy Rich documentary, but it's true. So obviously he had some issues that he needed to be working on, but so he died in 2004. My concern is that his spawn is our current Attorney General, who, reminder, episodes from February about how he needs to be impeached, still needs to be impeached. Terrible, awful toad man. So yeah, so obviously some weird stuff going, like family dynamics, I don't know. Creepy stuff. So the other thing, at this point, Epstein already has a reputation of inappropriate relationships with female students. He's 20. It's not okay, but he is 20 at the time. I don't know.
And they're teachers. That's already like that whole abuse of power thing.
Yeah, he doesn't understand it or think it applies to him. So in 1976, 2 years later, he was fired from Dalton for poor performance. Donald Barr had already left at that point, so he wasn't involved in the firing. And from there, he was hired to work at Bear Stearns, and he was really, really good at that. So that's like the financial industry. He was really good at it. He rose really quickly through the ranks. Like I said, he was super smart. And he was an expert in tax mitigation, which is just a fancy way of saying rich people finding loopholes to get out of paying their taxes to the government to use on services for the rest of us. Even though top tax rates in the United States are already shamefully low, which is part of the reason that everything sucks right now. So on top of being a pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein was an expert at finding ways for rich people to not have to pay their taxes.
Like, that's not as bad as the rest of the shit that he did, but also, like, that's on the list of reasons why he's in hell.
Yep. After 2 months, HR found out that he lied about everything on his resume, and his supervisor went into the meeting to fire him, and Epstein convinced him not to. Like, that's how manipulative he is. Like, between that and them not deciding that they didn't want to destroy his potential, like, they left it, he got to stay. He wasn't fired.
I hate that. Like, no. Like, please, like, go back in time and please destroy his potential, because this man used his potential to do evil things. Also, related to the victim blaming, again, we don't victim blame here. This guy convinced his employer not to fire him for being a total liar, like, on his resume and the whole reason he was hired in the first place. Like, how the fuck is a child supposed to not be convinced with whatever comes out of his mouth?
Yeah. It starts a pattern of him getting away with shit that, like, normal people would never be able to get away with. So in 1977, this doesn't exactly have to do with Epstein, but I do want to tell you what Trump is doing around the same time. So 1977, Trump makes an arrangement with the American government that he would remain completely tax exempt for the next 30 years. And there's been no explanation. Nobody knows why. The IRS should know. Congress has made requests to see his tax reforms. He hasn't provided them. And really, this just, like, ushers in an era of the rich paying less and less to the government, while people of lower socioeconomic statuses pay higher. What?
Just realized the sound wasn't coming out of my headphones. It was coming out of the computer speaker. I had my headphones in the whole time.
Wait, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. My headphone fell out and you got louder. And I was like, that was weird. And I realized the headphones weren't doing anything. The sound has been coming out of my computer speaker this entire time. And my dumbass is just sitting here with headphones.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay.
Wow. Stupid.
So this is around the time, the late 70s, that Trump was introduced to the world he now inhabits, where he learns the tactics that Jeffrey Epstein also used to avoid accountability. Those are mafia style tactics, like the silencing and the paying people off and the blackmail. Like, that's why Mafia State is in the title. Like, that, we'll get to it at the end. We'll talk about the federal judge whose family was targeted and son was murdered and husband was shot and is in critical condition later, but that's related to the Epstein case. And yeah, so that, I don't know, it's all connected. Everything comes back to white supremacy.
Yeah. And to learn more about, like, how awful Donald Trump has always been, read Sarah Kenzier's book, Hiding in Plain Sight. I would pull mine out right now too, but I am one of those monster people who takes off the book covers on my hardcover books. Like, I take off the outside cover. I've been told I'm a monster. Well, how did you get yours signed?
I bought a signed copy. So I got a I bought it on audiobook and I listened to it, but then for this episode, I wanted to be able to read the parts about Jeffrey Epstein, so I bought a signed copy from a bookstore in St. Louis.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Thank
Y'all,
you.
we love this book. Like,
Yes.
read this book.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So flash forward a decade-ish, Epstein meets Les Wexner, who is a multi-billionaire. He's also the founder of Victoria's Secret and L Brands, which is the limited. He somehow convinces, like Jeffrey somehow convinced Les Wexner to manage all of his money. So that is obviously very weird. Also, at some point, people started referring to Epstein as the boyfriend of Les Wexner, but he denies being bisexual, even though one out of like hundreds of the victims in Palm Beach was a boy. I really have no idea. But he convinced Wexner to give him a shit ton of money, and then he embezzled like $46 million from him between then and 2007.
Wow.
Yeah, and they had a falling out at that point. But 2 years later, 1988, Trump nearly runs for president. I want to throw that in here because people talk about Trump as a political neophyte, that he's new to it. He's not. He's been thinking about running for president for decades, and he almost ran in 1988.
I remember having a conversation back in like, I don't know, it probably was in like 2000 with my parents about Donald Trump running for president.
Oh, interesting.
I remember that conversation because me, little 8-year-old me, or however old I was like, that would be good because he's got a lot of money and he owns businesses and like blah, blah, blah. And my mom was straight up like, no, because he's not a good person and we want good people to be president. And also he's not even that good at his businesses. Some of them have gone bankrupt. Do you think America should go to bankrupt? And I was like, no, bankrupt is bad. That's what happens when you lose your money on Wheel of Fortune. Like 8-year-old me. Like,
But you got it. You grasped it.
Right, exactly. Like, I'm like, 8-year-old me thought it sounded great. It was explained to me why it wasn't great. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. This wouldn't be great. I mean, I'm pretty sure 64-year-old Brenda can also understand it, but I digress.
You would hope. 1990, Epstein buys his Palm Beach mansion. Like I mentioned, it's an island. It's super expensive to live there. And West Palm Beach is like one of the adjacent zip codes, and it's super low income. And the high schools and junior highs there basically became Jeffrey Epstein's hunting grounds, which was made a lot easier by the extreme income inequality. He also meets Ghislaine sometime in the 90s. People said that she was super devoted to him. She stayed super thin because it was his preference.
Oh, like a child?
Like a child.
Thin like a literal child?
Mm-hmm. Also probably why he didn't really care if you threw a boy in there, because like if you're young enough, girls and boys are pretty close to the same.
Yeah, like I was built like a boy until I was like 24.
During this time, there's also a rise in global organized crime, international money laundering, and if you want to learn more about that, you can go read the Iron Triangle speech by Robert Mueller. Just means like governments, really, really rich companies, and organized crime is going to start working together like it has, like is our president right now. But that's a pretty good speech. So 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Russia remains authoritarian, but renames the KGB to try and trick us, but it doesn't. Well, we know better now. Also, Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, who was a disgraced British media mogul, died after falling off of his yacht that year. Police ruled it an accident, but his family still maintains that it was a murder. Seems really sketchy to me. I don't know. I don't really know that much about yacht life, but I don't know. Also, throughout his whole life, he worked for Israeli intelligence, but he denied it. It only came out after he died because they like awarded him for something that he did during his life, like some thing he did for Israel.
Ooh.
It was very weird. But it's just like a whole corrupt circle of elites. He literally had the same yacht guy as Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay, like this whole story, like this whole bit here like sounds very familiar. And I think it's because it's like actually a soap opera storyline or maybe an episode of Law and Order or something.
I know. No, but if this was an episode of Law and Order, you'd be like, this is implausible. How are they getting away with this? Like,
yeah, so a disgraced British media mogul was murdered, and it turns out this whole time they find out after the fact that he was working with Israeli intelligence. Oh my God.
Yes, and later, spoiler alert, right before his death, he also started working with the Russian Mafia.
Because of course he did.
Right. So you're trying to tell me that this guy worked with an Israeli intelligence, the Russian Mafia, and he just fell off his yacht? I don't think so. All right. This is going to sound unrelated, but it makes sense later.
Okay.
In 1993, Roy Den Hollander, the man who targeted the federal judge on the Deutsche Bank Jeffrey Epstein case, gives a speech at the Kremlin. So this story is really, really, really new. It's really just developing. Like, it was just last week that Esther Salas, that judge, her family was targeted. So, like, but this has already been dug up. There's a video of this. So he has a pretty sketchy background, and we'll get to it later. He's a vicious misogynist, like a self-described men's rights activist. That's why when we're talking about white supremacist terrorism, like, this is that. So yeah, he gave it, for whatever reason, in 1983, he gave a speech at the Kremlin. He also claims that he ran a detective agency in Russia. So that's that. This part is really important. In 1994, Jane Doe, who was 13 at the time, was allegedly raped by Donald Trump at 4 different parties at Jeffrey Epstein's property in Manhattan. So she came forward before the 2016 election and experienced that line of threats and bribery and all of that stuff to try and discrediting, and eventually was intimidated into dropping her lawsuit. But I'm going to tell you her story, and you can tell me how similar it sounds to other Jeffrey Epstein victims. Although this is a victim of Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. So at this point, Trump and Jeffrey Epstein have known each other for 7 years. She was enticed to Jeffrey Epstein's property in Manhattan by a modeling career, which happened a lot. Details are just absolutely disgusting, super violent, very threatening. The shittiest part of all of it, though, is that all of this information was in the public domain in 2016, and she had a witness, which is very credible. Like, if you... I don't know. It just, like, I want to know where the spotlight level journalism was on all these allegations, because these claims were being made against the president of the United States, you know? Yeah. But no, like, almost nothing about it. It was just, like, swept under the rug.
I feel like the public and the media both tend to take such a like innocent until proven guilty approach to credible accusations of sexual assault. And it's just total bullshit. The courts should be innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
The public and the media, that's not their job. Like, that's just a bullshit approach to rape and sexual assault. And yet, like, when we talk about like a black person who gets killed by the police or being in the wrong neighborhood, there's just this acceptance of like, well, they shouldn't have been breaking the law. So it's like they're not innocent until proven guilty by literal law enforcement officers. But when a 13-year-old girl gets raped by the president, it's, you know, well, does she have proof?
Yeah. So for whatever reason, these allegations were treated like irrelevant gossip, which is why it's so ridiculous when Republicans complain about left-wing bias. This was a very credible allegation, and the New York Times just didn't think that they could talk about it because he wasn't convicted. But, like, this is what we're talking about when we say the media is failing us. It was public record. Like, she had a witness. The media should have been talking about it. I mean, it's just like they really they failed. They failed us. 1995, Trump has never turned over his taxes, but one of the years that leaked is 1995. This year shows a $916 million loss, even though publicly he's talking about how great everything's doing. Not really surprised there. And then 1996, this is the year that Jeffrey and Ghislaine meet the sisters Maria Farmer and her sister Annie. So Maria is an artist. They meet at a New York art show. She's a senior in college. Jeffrey and Ghislaine buy her art and promise her connections with important people in the art world. They call her a few months later to offer her a job managing the door at one of his properties that he's renovating. At this point, like, everything's normal. Just a normal employer, normal job. He seems like a nice guy who just wants to, like, help people out. So at this point, Maria introduces him to her sister, Annie, who's a minor at the time, and he offers Maria an artist in residency, which sounds really cool, until you find out that it's at Les Wexner's property in Ohio. So, yeah. So he has this, like, huge mansion behind Les Wexner's property in Ohio. Dave Chappelle also lives in Ohio. I don't understand why rich people choose to live in Ohio, but whatever.
Weird.
But yes, so anyway, Epstein and Ghislaine visit Maria while she's at her artist in residency, and they molest her, both of them, while they're there. That year, Epstein also promised her sister Annie a trip abroad to Thailand and Vietnam because she had Ivy League aspirations, and he said that would set her application apart. So before the trip, Epstein flew her out to his ranch in New Mexico. She and her family thought that she was going there to meet up with other students on the trip, but she's the only one there, which is kind of awkward. But she doesn't want to seem ungrateful, so she just kind of goes along with it. One morning on the trip, Epstein gets into bed with her in the morning and cuddles with her, starts to touch her, and eventually she makes some excuse and goes to the bathroom, stays in there for a long time, and then when she comes out, he's gone. Side note about Annie, she does eventually go on to get a PhD in philosophy and become a therapist, so it's extra interesting, I think, to hear her talk about her experiences. Eventually, Maria talks to Annie and realizes that they've both been abused, and then they decide as a family to take it to the NYPD, which is where they lived and where they met Jeffrey Epstein. But because it happened in Ohio and New Mexico, they were referred to the FBI. Again, this is 1996. My blood is boiling. But yeah, so they explained everything to the FBI, and they just never called them back. Like, literally nothing happened.
I mean, like, the same thing happens with, like, local law enforcement when sexual assault is reported. And you would hope the FBI would be a little bit better.
Yeah.
But
they do better in, like, a decade, but imagine how many girls were abused in that decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. I took out I wrote 24 pages. Obviously, I can't read that all to you guys. But I took out the instances of times when crimes were reported to local law enforcement because, like, that's literally like throwing, like, a pebble at a tank. Like, the FBI couldn't even stop him. Like, there were times when a model was molested in a hotel room and she took it to the local law enforcement. Nothing happened. Like, for those people, all he probably had to do was give, like, $35,000 to, like, an officer or two to, like, just forget about this, make this go away. That's probably, I mean, I'm making all of that up, but yeah. So, I don't know. I just imagine if this document could stop right here and that the FBI stopped this multi-state pedophile, but he didn't. Also in 1996, Trump goes to visit Russia under the guise of property development. There are still no buildings to show for these real estate property development meetings, despite 4 decades of meetings with the Russians, which seems weird. It's probably nothing. Probably normal. No?
Nothing is normal with that whole family.
Definitely not. Also, most of the time when Trump and Russia are talking about property development, like real estate to them is just money laundering. Like that's what that is to them. 1998, Jeffrey Epstein meets the other victim that I want to highlight, Virginia Roberts. She's 15 at the time, and she's working as a spa attendant at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, Trump's Mar-a-Lago?
Trump's Mar-a-Lago, where she is not the only person to be trafficked from there. So she was a spa attendant there. So she meets Ghislaine Maxwell, who finds out that she has aspirations of being a masseuse herself, and she's like, oh my gosh, you have to meet this guy. He's looking for a personal masseuse, and it's Jeffrey Epstein. So then she's trafficked specifically to Alan Dershowitz and Prince Andrew. Apparently this was common for girls to be recruited from Mar-a-Lago, especially lured by promises of modeling careers, but like any kind of training, like massage too, was an easy target.
I'm sure that Trump had no idea this was happening. You know,
I'm sure, yeah.
I'm sure
he would have stopped it if he did.
Right. Also, okay, wait. He owned Miss America at the time. And so this whole like luring girls with these promises of like modeling careers and stuff just to me seems like extra, like, I don't know, to me that's like extra red flag.
Yeah.
That like at the location where these girls are being trafficked, the owner also happens to own like one of the first things that pops into people's mind when they hear the words like modeling career is like pageantry, Miss America, especially in the late 90s. Like this was before America's Next Top Model. Like,
yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah, for sure.
Don't like it. Don't like it.
I remember when he walked into that dressing room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sketchy shit.
Yeah. Total creep.
Yes. 1999, Putin becomes president of Russia. 2000 is when that infamous picture of Epstein posing with Trump, Melania, and Ghislaine at Mar-a-Lago was taken. We'll put that on Instagram. In 2000, also, the book Red Mafia by Robert Friedman, who was like the expert on Russian organized crime, is published. So this is back in 2000. He dies the next year from complications of a heart condition. I think that was probably, I don't think that was sketchy. I think that was normal. I think, although, or his heart condition made his cause of death look really normal. Who knows? But anyway, that book, Red Mafia, is all about how the Russian mob has infiltrated America and a lot of other foreign governments and poses an enormous threat to global stability and safety back in 2000. And then 9/11 happened, and it was pretty much forgotten. Like, all of those warnings were, like, poof, out of people's heads because they only had one concern, and that was the Middle East.
Okay. Also, like, kind of going back to, like, narrative and version, obviously 9/11 and everything, you know, the unrest in the Middle East since we went to war there a jillion years ago, like, that's obviously very real and stuff. But when you think of, like, Putin's ties in the Middle East and, like, the people he's buddy friends with, I don't know, I just kind of am like, okay, so everybody forgot about the dangers of Russia's infiltration of our democracy after all the unrest in the Middle East. And then, like, instead of, like, Russia being the enemy, now it's anybody who's Middle Eastern, anybody with brown skin. Like, I definitely remember this, like, as a kid, like, being young and, like, watching, like, Rocky IV and being like, ooh, Russians are bad. And then suddenly in the early 2000s, Russians were fine. Russians were our buddies. The Cold War ended forever ago. Our enemy are the Iraqis and the people in Afghanistan and the Saudis and everybody in the Middle East. Like, you know, like, I don't know. So
I empathize people.
Yeah, like, I'm just hearing that, and I'm like, not that 9/11 was done as a distraction to, you know, Russia's issues.
But I'm sure Putin was grateful for it.
But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no way Putin wasn't very glad for it and supporting any aspect of America's attention that could be focused on the Middle East instead of his involvement in the rise of authoritarianism across the globe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I actually think that's a pretty good place to stop. So let's stop here at 2000. So we will talk. We'll release another episode. It should be in your feed now. This is a lot. I didn't want to make you guys listen to too much stuff about this horrible, horrible person. So let's go ahead and take a break here at 9/11, I guess. Sorry.
Take a break now. And on a positive note.
Yes, and we will be back to talk about Jeffrey Epstein from 2000 onward in just a little bit. So,
Was
bye.
the year 2000 actually 20 years ago? What the hell?
I don't know.
That was no.
Time's not real.
I don't understand time.
Thank you guys so much for listening to For Your Misinformation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you like it, give us a rating and a review. It helps us find more listeners, and the more of us there are, the better.
And make sure you're following along on Instagram and Twitter at FYMI Pod.
Shout out to Kyle Dibdahl for the intro and outro music, Hope Dye for the podcast art, and Ben Schlofelt for the audio production.
We come out with new episodes every Monday.